Hey guys, welcome to this week's Patreon Q&A for MIA. Today with me, I actually have my friend Nick, who I have interviewed before and who has also appeared on my channel. He's really fluent in Japanese, and he's going to help me answer some questions today. So, hey Nick.
Hi, how's it going?
No, I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
Good. You ready to
Sweet.
answer some questions?
Yeah, let's go. So,
All
we're
right.
probably just going to alternate who answers the question, and then after someone answers, if the other person has something they want to add, then they'll just jump in. So first from Earl, is that how you pronounce that name? Earl?
Yeah, it's Earl Brawley.
Earl Brawley. Okay, thanks for your question, Earl. I'm using the dictionary apps you recommended, wondering if you could do a small breakdown of the info that pops up there. Seeing a lot of stuff and not sure which is useful or not. Right now, just been copying pasting the bare minimum, but wondering if I'm missing out on some valuable info there. What the heck are those triangles? Haha, thanks. Okay, so this is a good question. This is a really good question because this is something that I also was ignorant about for a long time. I had no idea what all the extra information was in the monolingual dictionary. But yeah, it's definitely nice to know, and some of it is useful. So I'm just going to switch over to showing my desktop right now so that we can actually look at this. So when you said dictionary apps, I'm assuming that you meant Epwings inside Qualibri. There's a chance that you were talking about like iPhone or Android, like smartphone apps, but it's pretty similar. So I'm just gonna go and explain the Epwings. So basically, as you can see right here, and I'm guessing you have the same setup as well on your computer. There's many different dictionaries that you have access to with these Epwings, and each dictionary has its own system of notation. So I can't tell you like it would take a while and I would have to go back and like do some like research to find out exactly what all the notation means for each separate dictionary, but there's a few different categories of information that they give, and so I think if I explain that, then it will become pretty self evident what the individual markings in each dictionary mean. So basically, let's just go through some words and I'll explain everything that's on the screen. I think everything will naturally become clear. So here, obviously, we have the word in hiragana and then how it can be written in kanji. And depending on the dictionary, there's going to be some notation inside of these fat brackets. So these fat brackets generally mean how the word is written in kanji. And if it has a one of these dots in the middle, that means it can be written multiple different ways. Now, if we scroll down to meikyo, we'll see that the word is in these kind of square line brackets, these kind of pointy brackets. Now, what this means is that the kanji doesn't really correlate to the reading. It's called jikujikun in Japanese, and it means that basically people took some kanji and they just slapped a random reading on top of the kanji compound that has nothing to do with the onyomi or kunyomi of the original kanji. So you can do this in Japanese. You can literally just make up new kanji readings whenever you feel like it, and that happens a lot. And so these brackets are telling you that ashita has nothing to do with this kanji, and it has nothing to do with this kanji. And it's the same thing with asu. Now, I actually don't know what the difference are between these kind of double pointy brackets and these single pointy brackets. They're obviously both a similar thing because asu also has nothing to do with these two kanji. But yeah, that's what those mean. And now if we go to so now to go back up and talk about some of the other information. So this right here is the pitch accent, obviously, on Daijidin and on Shin Meikai right here. You'll get the pitch accent. This is the pitch accent in Shin Meikai. This right here is telling you that it's a noun. It's not the na is me for meishi, and normally right here it will tell you like for example if it's a verb it'll tell you what type of verb it is. Like for example, here we see that it's this ugoku right here is for doshi, so that means verb, and then sahen is the type of verb that it is. It tells you how it's going to conjugate. And then this thing right here, the boon, it means this is what type of verb it was in classical Japanese. So in classical Japanese, there was more different types of verbs and they conjugated differently. And also the dictionary form of the verb was different. So this tells you that in modern day Japanese, it's suru in dictionary form, and it's a dolshi sahen. Sahen is the type of verb. And then classical Japanese, it's also a sahen, but it's just su instead of suru because the dictionary form didn't need the ru. And for sometimes they will be the same in classical Japanese and in modern day Japanese. Like this time they're both sahen. But if we look up, for example, like keru, then we'll see that. Oh, actually, that was a bad example. Let's see. Tasukeru. We'll see that in modern day Japanese, it's a dolshi, and then this ka right here means that the part of the verb that conjugates starts with a k. If you study Japanese grammar in Japanese, you'll learn more about what that really means. And then shimo ichi is the type of verb, and then we'll see in classical Japanese it was kagyo shimo nidan, and it was sku instead of skeru. Oops, this wasn't even taskeru. This was just skeru. Well, it's the same if we look at taskeru right here. It used to be shimo ichidan, and then in classical Japanese it became shimo nidan. And so that's for like verbs, and then for meishi, it'll just have na. You can learn the other shortcuts of what part of speech it was. And then also, for example, if we go to, like, here's another word. So now the triangles that you were talking about. So right here, at least in the case of meikyo, the clear triangle means that the two kanji are joyo kanji, but the readings are not standard. And the black triangle means it's not a joyo kanji. So like this kanji right here, its standard readings are probably ama or ten or something. But in this case, it's appare, and so it's a standard kanji, but a kind of arbitrary, not standard reading. And so that's what this triangle tells you. And so like this dictionary Daiji-sen, instead of a clear triangle and then a solid triangle, it has a clear triangle and then an X. But basically, that's what the symbols are going to mean. It's either going to be like, it's going to mean that the kanji is compound is arbitrary, like in here in ashita, it tells you that the two kanji together have nothing to do with the reading, or if it's like this where it has something to do with the reading, like because it's a pare and this pare is like hare, maybe, then that's going to mean that it's the standard kanji, but then a different reading. And then finally, sometimes you'll see, let's see, weird scribbly kana right here. You see kino and then kino fu. And what this is right here is that it's the reading in old kana. So before World War II, there was a different system of kana. There's a different system of spelling words with kana. And this tells you how it used to be spelled, because there's not a one-to-one relationship between the new way of spelling and the old way. So sometimes if you don't look it up in a dictionary, you wouldn't know. And then I guess one other thing I can add is that if you see sentences, if you see example sentences like this that are really long and have a slash in it, then that means that it's coming from a famous piece of Japanese literature, normally a really old piece of Japanese literature. And so that usually means that the sentence is going to be extremely difficult and you probably don't want to bother trying to understand it. But if the sentence doesn't have a slash in it, because by the way, so this is the sentence and then the slash is, after the slash is the actual work. So there's the work, and then in parentheses you have the author. And so, or I think that's how it works. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's like, here's the work and here's the chapter. Actually, I think, yeah, sorry. Here's the work and then here's the chapter. And so, but if you just have a small sentence with no slash in it, then that means it was an example sentence that was made for this dictionary, and it's probably going to be a prototypical usage and easy to understand. So it's good to use for sentences or just for trying to help understand the word. So, okay, hope that was helpful. I didn't explain it everything, but if you go into, like, if you have a dictionary for your phone, you can go into the Hande of the dictionary if you go into, like, towards the settings, and it will list what all its own notations mean. And so when you're making cards, I recommend taking, like, all of this information, because, I mean, you have nothing to lose taking more information. There's no real point of going in and deleting information out of the dictionary, because later on when the card comes up in a few years and you're much better at Japanese, there's a chance that you might be caring about some of this information and it might be useful to you. And if not, well, you're not losing anything by having extra information. So I would just copy everything, because you never know what's going to be useful in the future and you have nothing to lose. So yeah, there's that. So okay, Nick, you want to
All right.
read the
Yep.
next
Question by Nitsi. Should I make a new card for a word that I semi-know? For example, if I come across the word yashiki in my immersion and it looks really familiar, so I look it up and see that it does in fact mean estate, even though I never made a card for it. Should I make a new card for this word to solidify it, or should I trust my immersion to make me know the word? Because the same way I magically knew what it meant, it will make me learn it completely. Similarly, if one of these words show up in an I+1 sentences, it counts as an I+2 sentence now, and therefore I wouldn't use it, shouldn't use it, or can I use a sentence instead? My advice would be, well, first of all, you already did it, but always look up the word, because a lot of times, especially when you're not necessarily to the more advanced stages, readings can kind of seem random, and especially for some words, you swear that this kanji has a certain reading, but it changes just for this specific word. Matt already mentioned how in Japanese you can literally just make readings pretty much whatever you want. So always look it up and confirm. But if it confirmed what you already thought was the reading or already thought was the meaning, then you can just let it be. You don't necessarily have to make a card and just see what happens. Just kind of let it sit. And if you come across it again and you know it really well, then you know it really well. If you come across it again and you don't know it very well, maybe you messed up the reading or you don't quite know the meaning, well, then you can make a card for it. And if it shows up in an I+1 sentence, you can just go ahead and make the sentence and treat it the same way. Just let it be. And if it turns out that, oh, yeah, the fact that I knew it in that instance was just maybe your brain was running on all cylinders, or maybe there was, for whatever reason, in the context, it just made a lot of sense. But when you make a sentence, it doesn't necessarily work. So just let it sit and see what happens would be my advice on that.
Yeah, so yeah, me and Nick were talking about this beforehand, but basically, whenever you're in doubt about whether you should make a card for something, because you're like, oh well, I kind of know it, but I don't totally know it, then yeah, just let it sit because if it's gonna come up again eventually, and then you're either gonna find out, oh wow, I actually still remember it. I didn't need to make a card. Good thing I didn't waste my time. Or, oh, I forgot it. I guess I do need to make a card. So it's never too late. So there's really no reason to make a card when you're not sure. So
Yep.
yeah, okay. So, Shkabak says on YogaMatt, in the YogaMatt second episode of the YogaMatt podcast, you mentioned that you only had 3 books that you became completely engrossed in and a strong desire to finish. What were they? So, I'm gonna tell you what they were, but you got to remember that when I was like, in my hardcore AJAT phase, in the middle of my hardcore AJAT days, I was a teenager who kind of had Chunibyo and stuff. So I don't know if I read these now, if I would still really be into them and like them. They might be a little bit immature and childish, but you asked. So the first one is and by the way, I'll put them in the description if you don't want to have to try to listen to them. But Utsuro no Hako to Rei no Maria. I barely even remember what this is about now, but it was like a light novel that like had like time travel in it, and I just remember I like from the first page I was like really captivated, and it was like actually really suspenseful, and it was also pretty easy to read for me at the time. So I just read the first couple of the books. The series is super long, like all light novel series, but I didn't get that far. And then the next is the first book in the Zaregoto series by Nishio Ishin. So you probably know Nishio Ishin from like Bakemonogatari or Katanagatari, but he has some novel series that never became made into anime. And this was like his first big series. It was called the Zaregoto series, and the first one is called Kubiki Recycle. Aoiro Savang to Zaregoto Zukai. So yeah, I remember it's like a bunch of people on an island, and then like someone gets murdered, and then the main character has to like work with his like autistic / genius friend to find out who the killer was and stuff. And it was pretty creative. If you like Bakemonogatari or other stuff by Nishio Ishin, you might like it. And then the last one was Tegami by Higashi no Keigo, which is not a light novel. It's actually like a real novel. It was one of the first real novels that I actually read. And I remember it was like, I think part of the reason why I really got into it was because it was so refreshing to not be a light novel. Like it felt so much more realistic and like something that could actually happen in the real world. Whereas light novels, they take a lot of suspension of disbelief to enjoy. And it's about someone whose brother murdered someone and got put in jail, and then how the fact that his brother was a murderer basically like ruined his whole life, even though he had never done anything wrong. So yeah, And then Nick, if you want to talk about some novels you like too, then
Yeah, I mean, really, personally for me, the only novels, as in fiction novels, that I truly enjoyed were ones by Morimi Tomiko, specifically Yojohan Shinwa Taike, which is about a guy. It's basically split into four chapters, and each one it starts over at the beginning of his college days. It rewinds time, but it treats it from the perspective of he doesn't know that time has been reversed, but he makes a different decision. He enters a different club or a different circle, and it just is his events that it. And the last chapter has him go through some pretty tough times, and he realizes that you know he learns a lesson at the end of it. I really liked it because of the writing. I just really liked the way Morimi Tomiko writes, and it was very captivating. And the anime is also very good. Definitely recommend it. And then the other novel was Yoru wa Mijikashi Aruke yo Tome, which is literally takes place in the exact same universe as Yojo Hanshin wa Taike, with a lot of the same characters introduced, but a different main character. Same writing style. Was really nice. I really enjoyed it, and I really recommend Morimi Tomiko's work. It can be a little bit difficult at times because the sentences can get really long and he can use some archaic words, but they are worth getting into, in my opinion. And that's pretty much it for
sweet.
novels.
Yeah, they're super difficult. I remember when I was about 1 year into age adding, I tried to read Yojohan Shiwa Taike, and it took me like an hour to get past the first page, and then I gave up. And I would continually come back to it every couple of months, usually to find that it was still too difficult. But once I finally reached the point where I could, fully read it, it was really satisfying. So,
okay, yeah. Next one is again by Earl, on a roll today. Hello, just wondering about monolingual definitions on cards. Once you have a fairly firm grasp on the meaning of a word, do you still force yourself to read the definition when the word comes up, or do you just skip it? So this is going to depend on where you're at in terms of skill, but my general advice is that you, when you're at kind of the more beginning stages and you're kind of getting your bearings in the monolingual dictionary, because the monolingual dictionary is it's kind of wild at first. A lot of it, when you look up a word, you don't know if you're going to actually understand the definition fully. Sometimes you can actually read the whole definition, but it just doesn't click for you. And so while you're still getting your bearings, I would only use read the definition, the monolingual definition of a word, if you really need that refresher. And then I would only, quote unquote, force yourself to read it, or actually use reading the dictionary definition as a study tool once you have a firmer grasp on the monolingual dictionary as a whole. And once you're at the point where monolingual dictionary becomes comfortable to use, it actually might even get easier than using the bilingual dictionary, which I know is the case for Matt and I. It's like we feel like we know the word better if we look it up in the monolingual dictionary. Once you get to that point, you can kind of use the definition as like a way to train yourself maybe on specific nuances of the word, or whether or not you can give a solid explanation of what the word means, etc. But until you get to that point, it's really not worth it to force yourself to read it every single time the card comes up.
Yeah, and I would just add that once you really do get comfortable with the monolingual dictionary, reading the definitions will cease to require a lot of energy and work. It'll just be like you glance your eyes on the definition and then you've already understood it. And so when you get to that point, it is worth reading, I'd say, because you can. It's nice to compare what your impression of the meaning of the word was with what the definition actually says, and kind of refresh your memory, like kind of update it. But yeah, what Nick said. So Matt McYoung asks, "Hey Matt, you mentioned once in a video that there are certain terminology exclusive to J dictionaries. We also briefly saw an example of such on the previous Q&A. Thus, is there any benefit in creating Anki cards for said terminology with examples? Something potentially useful for future Japanese learners to ease into monolingual transition in preparation for reading J dictionaries? Or is it redundant and better to just go in cold? Or does an Anki deck like this already exist?" So I'm guessing. So the first time I read this question, actually, I didn't read it close enough, and I assumed you were asking, should I make cards for words that are in the definitions of dictionary words? In which case I thought, well, yeah, definitely, that's actually what I've always recommended. Instead of just going cold turkey and, looking up a word that you don't know in the Japanese dictionary And then if there's a word in that definition that you don't know, looking that in the Japanese dictionary. And then if there's a word in that one, just look it up in the Japanese dictionary. So just endlessly going on a rabbit hole of trying to look up words. Instead of doing that, look up a word you don't know in the Japanese dictionary. And then if there's a word you don't know in the definition, look that up in the English dictionary. And then learn that word. And then if you do this, after you've learned like 200-300 of these words that are pretty much only used in the dictionary, or at least commonly used in the dictionary, then reading definitions will be pretty easy. And so I definitely recommend making Anki cards for words that you find in the dictionary and, learning them through English, because it's kind of just a pragmatic means, right? You want to eventually stop using English, but instead of just going cold turkey, you're using English as a tool to help you stop using English. So you're kind of weaning yourself off, and it's just going to make the process smoother and less frustrating. But maybe you're asking here, not that, maybe you already do that, but you're asking, would it be useful if we made like a pre-made deck that we could just give people? And in that case, as someone pointed out in a reply to your comment, Adam from Japanese Level Up has made a deck like this. I haven't really looked at his deck. I don't know how good it is, or like how high quality it is, how useful it is. I don't know how much money he charges for it, because I know he charges money for his decks. But I think that in theory, you definitely could make a deck like this that would be really useful. And I do plan on making one eventually in the future. It's not a high priority because it's not necessary, right? Like if you do the process that I explained, where you just look up a word that you don't know in the Japanese dictionary, and then you look up the words in that definition in an English dictionary, within a couple weeks, you will become able to use the monolingual dictionary just fine. So I don't really see it as necessary, but it could be nice to have. It could kind of streamline the whole process of making the monolingual transition, because you just give someone this deck, they just learn like 10 cards a day out of the deck, and then within a month they would be able to use the monolingual dictionary. So yeah, I do think that there would be a value if someone made this deck. It'd have to do a good job with making it, obviously, and that would be difficult. But I think that in the future, once I, eventually I would get to making one of those for my followers. So yeah.
This next question is geared towards Matt, but I think we both have some anecdotes to share. How is your average school day? Japanese class must be like repeating elementary
Wait,
school.
gotta give him credit. Z Dennis.
Oh yeah, sorry, Z Dennis. Thank you for your question. So how was your average school day, Matt?
Okay, so I'll say I already finished all the Japanese classes at school. So right now I'm actually not taking like Japanese language classes. Like this term I'm taking linguistics classes, and I'm actually learning some pretty interesting stuff. But at my old college, when I was actually taking Japanese language classes, it was kind of like repeating elementary school. It was extremely easy, and I was like leagues ahead of everyone else in the class. And I actually kind of enjoyed it because I was kind of immature at the time. And so I kind of got a little egoic high off of, out of like crushing all the people in my class, which was kind of, in hindsight, kind of silly that I felt that way. But, yeah, there was like, I had like some of the teachers like kind of embraced my abilities, and would like try to go out of their way to challenge me. But other teachers would kind of, I don't know, would be kind of passive aggressive towards me, because they felt like, I don't know, I was making fun of their class by just being there. And I did kind of have a really cocky attitude. So I guess I can't really blame them for being frustrated with me. But there were times where like the teacher would ask if someone knew something or knew how to read a certain kanji, assuming that no one would be able to read it, but then I would be able to. And then she'd actually be like, what the heck? Why do you know that? And it'd almost be like she was upset because I was like stealing her opportunity to teach us or something. I don't know. But one of the words was bosatsu. I remember when we were learning about Buddhism, she was like, does anyone know how to read this? And she was like, no one's going to be able to read this. And I was like, yeah, bosatsu. And she was like, what the fuck? And that was pretty funny. And it also did get to the point where she would ask the class a question, and she would say, anyone but Matt. Like, does anyone but Matt know this? And that was pretty funny. And there were other times where like she would try to like nitpick my Japanese knowledge, and like there was one other time where like where it was during a test. We had to like write the definitions of words in Japanese, and because I was obsessed with Anki, I happened to have memorized the actual like Japanese monolingual definition of one of the words. And I remember she told me, she like on my test, like, oh, you're close, but it's a little bit off. Actually, it means this. And I was like, no, this is literally word for word what's in Daijiri. Look. And she still was like, oh, I mean, okay, I'll give you the point, but I still don't agree with it. And I was like, okay, yeah, great. So, yeah, it was pretty fun and an interesting experience I had.
Pretty fun. Yeah. In one of my Japanese classes at when I was studying abroad, sort of similar things happen. Like, I remember one time, it was specifically about whether or not a word usage was right, and the teacher said it wasn't. But then when he looked it up in the dictionary, it literally had an example sentence just like it. And I was like, well, how can this be right? Like, do I trust the dictionary or do I trust you? Because a lot of times they don't teach using monolingual dictionaries in Japanese classes, so it could be. But yeah, it's really easy to get a big head if you're that far ahead of everyone else, especially in terms of like kanji knowledge. So
Yeah, and I mean, it's also kind of frustrating because you see people who are misunderstanding language acquisition so badly, and it really just feels like you want to scream out like, you guys are all wrong, you do it like this. But you kind of just get over that, and then it's kind of just, it is kind of like repeating elementary school, and you kind of just
yeah, you don't have to really ever study.
yeah,
And you
kind
still
of
get like
kind of fun, although totally
there's going to be
bullshit.
no other. I don't know if Z Dennis. I don't know if you're taking Japanese classes or if like you plan to maybe when you get better. But for anyone who's like going to take Japanese classes after like age adding or doing immersion based learning or whatever, like comparatively, they're just so easy. Like never, I think in college will you ever have a class like that where you can just literally do no work and still get near 100%.
Yeah, like be the best in the class, like by far.
On the exam. Like there are probably easy classes where you can like do well without much effort, but like you won't ever excel. You'll just be able to do well, but like in those classes, you will literally be the cream of the crop just basically because of your past experience, which is to be expected. I mean, if you spend all day reading the monolingual dictionary, you're gonna
Yeah,
be in a good position.
and I will say
All
that
right.
some of the teachers literally thought that I was a genius, and some loved me for that, some hated me for that. So that will probably happen because in their mind, learning only happens like they've seen thousands of students get extremely shitty results trying really hard. And so when they see someone who like is self-taught and they have this type of results, like first of all to them they think that being self-taught is like more difficult than just taking a class. And so it's like, "Whoa, you're self-taught and you've got better than I've ever seen anyone ever get." Like they literally just think
Yeah.
that your brain is broken or something in a way.
Yeah. Their assumptions of what it takes to the language are so backwards from what's actually true that you got to start like really deep, and they obviously won't really care. But unless your professor's well versed in like linguistics or whatever, then which probably most aren't, in my experience at least, then they're not going to really be supportive of the fact that like self study is the best way to go.
Yeah, of course
I
not. It's like
remember,
then their profession becomes meaningless.
I remember. I don't recommend any of you do this if you're taking Japanese classes, but in one of my classes, we had like a presentation every week on like a certain figure in Japanese history, and so I was reading a book about the person. I forget who it even was, but like I was reading a book about the person instead of listening to the teacher, and the teacher like came over and she thought I was fooling around, and I'm like, no, it literally is about what you're teaching us. It's all in Japanese too, so it like is helping with reading comprehension or whatever, and yeah, she got pretty upset. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. It just, it was actually just more fun to read the book during class than to listen. But
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
recommend you do that because that's very rude. I wasn't thinking properly at the time. I was just thinking I want to get as much reading time in as possible. But yeah,
Cool.
respect your teachers.
Yeah, it might be challenging, but obviously that's ideal. Okay, David Lips
Okay.
asks, I find that even after learning a card, bilingual sentence cards for me, I have to fail it 3 or 4 times over the next few days before it really sticks. I feel like I really know them, only to mess it up the next day. Is this a normal phenomenon that everyone else experiences, or is it just me not learning the card properly the first time? I assume it might have something to do with the card having to pass from short term to long term memory. But is there anything I can do from the start to make sure that the card begins as healthy as possible, so that I don't have to fail it so many times before it sticks? I sometimes have a rough time remembering words with a lot of the shu, chu, chu, shou, shou, chou, chou, etc. I can recall meaning and context of the word, just not the exact reading / combination of the before mentioned phonemes. Sometimes I'm able to remember the correct reading by remembering other words I know with the same kanji, so I've been tackling it from that angle, but any advice for combating that is welcome. Cheers. Okay, so first of all, there's a few things just in Anki that you can check out. First of all, in your options group settings, make sure that your graduating interval is set to 1 day. So this means that after you learn a card, it will always come up the next day. So if this is set to 3 or 4, then that could be too big of a jump in memory, and that could be one of the reasons why you're forgetting it. So make sure your graduating interval is set to 1. Also, you can make your learning steps, instead of having it 110, which is default, which means that if a new card comes up, you get it wrong, it shows up in 1 minute. If you get it right, it shows up in 10 minutes. You get it right, then it shows up the next day. If you have a graduating interval of 1 day, you can try setting it to 120, which would mean that after getting it right, you have to wait 20 minutes before you answer it again in order for it to graduate and become a learned card. And so if you make this gap longer from 10 minutes to 20 minutes, then you're basically giving your brain more time to flush your short-term memory, and so you'll be relying on long-term memory more on that second repetition, and that could also help. And so I recommend doing that. And then other things to think about are if you're having trouble remembering the reading, then I would recommend try you to read the sentence out loud. And especially also, if you have audio on your cards, really try to listen to the audio. Maybe try closing your eyes and listening to the audio before you grade the card, and really try to focus on the kind of musicality, or like the auditory aspect of how the word sounds. Like, don't try to memorize which kana the word of the reading is. Like, don't try to remember, like, if it's like shou chou, don't try to remember it's like shou u chou u, or whatever like that, or like shi small yo u, like whatever. Like, don't try to remember the kana. Try to remember the sound of the word, and almost like you're memorizing like the chorus of a song or something. Try to hear the sound in your mind, or focus on the sound when you're listening to the audio of the card. Maybe try to say it out loud, and really try to remember the musicality of it, because that's going to probably be easier for your brain to remember than actual kana characters. And also, I'll just say that this is something that will gradually get easier as you get better, because your brain will get more and more comfortable with the Japanese phonetic system, and it will become more and more effortless to remember how just new words in general. So, yeah. Anything to add, Nick?
Yeah, I'd say also, I don't know if you mentioned writing it out as kind of like a last, if you really, really just can't remember it, like writing it out, the kanji, not the kana, writing the kanji and like saying out loud, like, okay, this is this reading, can help you. But again, I feel like this specific problem David is having with like the shoes and choose, all those, and the shows and shows, they that will eventually go away. Like I don't know, he might be nervous that, like, oh no, am I gonna have to combat this like my entire time learning Japanese? Like, no, it's going to go away, and more than likely it's going to go away fairly quickly, especially if you take the advice of more engaging auditorily what's going on instead of just pictorially. But obviously writing it out is very helpful, and so that's something I really recommend doing. And again, don't stress out about it too much, because everyone messes up readings every now and then. So, yeah.
Cool.
These were a good batch of questions.
Well, wait, we've only been going for like 33 minutes, so we can try to do a couple more.
It says 41 on my.
Oh, no way. Oh, no wonder it felt like it'd been a long time. Wait.
Yeah, you spent 15 minutes on the first question.
Okay.
By the way.
Oh, no. Well, our line call has been 40 minutes, but we didn't start recording right away.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Shit, I'm dumb. Sorry, now you're gonna have to edit.
No, it's all good. It's all good. This is real life right here. So, yeah, because we were aiming to go to 45 minutes for the Q&A. So that's
okay,
why.
never mind. Yeah, our call is.
But we're only 34 minutes in right now, so go ahead and get the next question.
All right. After finishing RTK1, I'm trying to determine what's the best course of action to maintain kanji. I see three options and would like to know your thought on the one that makes the most sense. One, continue English to Japanese reps. Two, switch to lazy kanji. Or three, just rely purely on immersion and don't do kanji reps. Okay, so you've already finished RTK1. Sorry, Billy Yuan. Thank you for your question. Uh, I would personally recommend continue doing your RTK1 reps because I mean, there's no reason to just not do them. I mean, they're there and they're probably getting smaller and smaller by the day, so they're probably not too large of a burden on you to do them. And then obviously continue immersing and continue making either bilingual sentence cards or monolingual sentence cards wherever you're at in the sentence phase. I'm not exactly sure, but uh, so continue making those, and then as you get better at Japanese, you're going to start actually learning the kanji, and then once that happens, you can start adding keywords, like Japanese keywords or Japanese explanations or Japanese whatever to different kanji as they come up in your reps. But make sure you actually know the kanji. Don't just start adding them to every kanji because you don't. You probably know like very few kanji for real right now. You probably only know the English keyword and the writing. But once you actually start having a fundamental understanding of okay, this character vaguely means this in Japanese, and here's a good keyword that kind of shows you its key function and usage. Then you can start adding those to your reps, but don't stop doing your RTK reps.
Yeah, and I would say you don't even
So
have to think of like adding Japanese to the front of your cards like as adding a Japanese keyword. You can just think of it as like an additional kind of cue you're giving your memory to help you recall it. So like if you're when you're doing your kanji reps, if a kanji comes up and you're like, "Oh, I know like you know that you have the keyword, you look at the back of the card and then you see the kanji and you're like, "Oh, this is the kanji for osoi." Right? Then you can just put osoi at the front of the card in addition to the keyword. You don't need to erase the English keyword or replace it. Just keep the English keyword and then you can add Japanese in addition to that. And so yeah, when you're doing your reps, if a kanji comes up and you don't know any words for it yet, then just keep going. But if you do know a word for it, then yeah, you can put that word in hiragana on the front of the card. If it's like a two kanji word, then you can put the one of the kanji in like only put the kanji that the card is for in hiragana and put the other part of the word in just keep it in kanji. Like for example, if it was going to be like trying to think of an example in real time, worst idea ever. Uh, like for example, well, if it was like like Kongo, and then you it was for Kong like kanji no Kong, then you could just put like kan in hiragana and then the go in kanji like that. And then also what I would do is make sure you have a low leech threshold. Like I would put like 4 on your leech threshold, and then make sure that you properly handle your leeches. So if a card becomes a leech, either just delete it because if you delete a few kanji here and there, you'll still know 99% of kanji, or at least suspend it and then come back to it later when you're better at Japanese, or either reset the interval on the card and like make a better story or add a Japanese keyword or something like that. Like do something. So make sure you actually handle your leeches because a lot of times if your retention rate is bad, it's because you're failing like the same small percentage of cards over and over and over again, and you want to avoid that trap. So cool. So then next question, Louis DeBrat asks, do you add cards for new words which meaning and reading are obvious at first sight? Say, rigai kanke or ishikabe. I think that the N1 and not fluent interview. I think that in the N1 and not fluent interview, you said that even if you understand the word, if it's new, it doesn't count as a known word. But it always seems silly to spend time making a card for those. So yeah, I said in that video that if it's a word you've never seen before, even if you can instantly tell what it means and how it's read, if you've never seen it before, you didn't know the word. That's true. But that doesn't mean that you should make a card for it. Basically, this is similar to what Nick explained in an earlier question, where basically, if you're ever in a situation where you're not sure if you should make a card or not, well, the answer is always don't make the card because, like, just wait. And then next time the word comes up, if you remembered it, great, you don't need the card. And then if you find out, oh, I forgot it, even though I thought that I might have remembered it, well, then you can make the card. And again, like Nick said, even if you think that you can guess what the reading of a kanji is, you definitely want to look it up just in case because you can never fully predict kanji. There's always some unpredictability that will always remain, even no matter if you're a native speaker. You can never know with 100% certainty because there's just a lot of randomness built into the readings of kanji.
Yeah.
And then, like someone replied to that question saying, I'll add to the question, if I already know kizu, should I add mukizu when I see it, or is it too obvious and a waste of potential immersion time?
It's the same. That's the same guy who asked. Nitsi is the same guy whose question I answered about adding cards when you already know them, or something similar to that. And I think it's the same general principles that just let it sit and see what happens. Because, for example, like if you hear Mukizu and you don't know what it means, but then you look at the subtitle file of whatever anime you're watching and you see it, that's going to really reinforce it. Like more than likely, you've probably already learned it, but just let it sit. And then if it comes up again in a reading, whatever you're reading a book or a manga or whatever, and you see it and you don't understand, you forget the reading or whatever, then you can add it because then you know for sure that you're going to need it. But don't feel compelled to make it right then and there. Just kind of let it sit. There's plenty of other words to go after that you won't automatically know right away what their reading and meaning are.
Yeah, so basically the underlying principle is if you think there's a chance that you might remember it without a card, but there's also a chance that you might not, then just wait and see what happens. If it turns out that you didn't remember it, then you can make a card then. It's never too late. So whenever in doubt, don't make the card because there's a possibility of wasting time. Okay, so yeah, this can be the next one can be the last question. So go ahead, Nick.
Is it what are your thoughts on abolishing kanji, or at least reducing the number of Joyo kanji? John Brendel. So okay. First of all, Joyo kanji will never get reduced, more than likely, and I don't think they should because, if anything, they should get increased because there's a lot of kanji that are just needed that aren't necessarily there, and it would be useful to have. And there's a ton of kanji that are actually very common and commonly used, but they're not technically considered Joyo kanji. So then it just makes it, really. And Matt's "Why Japanese Kanji Suck" video, I think explains this pretty well. And then obviously abolishing kanji in general is pretty much impossible because if you've ever tried to play a Pokemon game in Japanese, the only reason it's really possible is because there's spaces in between the words. And if there wasn't spaces, it'd be just really hard to read. And considering the fact that a lot of technical words are Kongo, they're derived from the Chinese words, and they have a lot of similar characteristics, including pitch accent even, because most of them are just Heiban, they're just flat. So you wouldn't even be able to really parse the words in real time when you're reading it. And so Japanese actually needs the kanji to function as a language in and of itself. So abolishing kanji is not going to happen. And then, I don't think the Joyo kanji number is going to increase or decrease, but it should be increased because then it'd make it a lot easier for learners as well to know. Because RTK1, it's a good start, but it really isn't enough to be able to read complex stuff like, maybe encyclopedias or books or whatever. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, it is unfortunate in a way that the Japanese language uses kanji because it makes it so inconvenient for both natives and foreign speakers to learn, but especially even natives, right? I mean, hypothetically, a language should have a writing system that takes 1 week for natives to learn, right? The fact that natives have to go to school for between 6 to 12 years just to be able to read their own language is pretty inefficient. But the Japanese kind of language and people have kind of just fucked themselves due to their history because like almost 50% of the Japanese language is borrowed from Chinese. And basically they borrowed the kanji and they borrowed the readings, but a lot of information was lost because Chinese has tones and it always had some form of tones, even though it was different than the kind of tones they have today. And so basically in Japanese, what became synonyms were originally actually differentiated, right? Because for any like chunk of sound, like if you said like seicho or whatever, like sei had 4 different possibilities and sho had 4 different possibilities based off pronunciation. And so that made there be like 1/4 or less. I mean, I can't do the math in my head, but there'd be a lot less possibilities of homophones, even though I'm pretty sure there still were a lot of homophones. So in Japanese now, because there's no tones, if you took out the kanji, there would be so many words that would become homophones, especially technical words for like technical subjects. It would really just make the language much less useful and more difficult to actually utilize as a communication tool. It would actually just render the language like not useless, but it would make it much less useful. And so I
Yeah,
don't
it'd
think it's
be.
ever going to happen.
I think, yeah, it'd be probably one of the simplest writing systems in the entire world if just kanji were completely abolished. But it would also be probably almost non-functional as a writing system. So, yeah, kanji are important. Learn to love them.
Yeah, except
I love
I
them.
would assume that it would be the same thing in Korean, only somehow they managed to get rid of kanji. So then
Well, the way they did it, well, the way Hangul function are is different than kana, and like as far as I understand, Korean is really efficient, although I don't know it, so I
I
can't
know,
say
but
exactly
Korean
why.
also has a lot of like borrowed Kongo that they used to write kanji for. So you would assume that if they turned that into a phonetic system, there would be lots of homophones, right?
Yeah, probably.
And I don't know
Well,
how they deal with that.
they're whoever made Hangul is a genius,
Well, I know, but
and
it's still
hiragana.
a purely phonetic system, right? Like things that are pronounced the same are always going to be written the same in Hangul,
Is that the case? Yeah, yeah, I'm pretty
which
sure that's
means
right.
that all homophones that were only differentiated with kanji would lose their distinction.
Did they borrow as many Kongo as
I
Japanese
don't
does?
probably not as many, but I really don't know. I really can't speak to it. But it just surprises me that Korean people are doing just fine without kanji given their history.
Yep.
But I'd be curious
Yeah.
about talking to someone who actually speaks Korean
Yeah, that's
to
actually really good. That's something you should do
yeah, so it makes
because
me
that's
doubt everything
actually
I
now that you
just
mention
said,
it.
but intuitively it makes no sense how they could abolish kanji to me.
Yeah. Well, definitely. You know, assuming Hangul is kind of like an outlier, like it was just a really well designed system, or the Korean, the language history is just different. I think it's safe to say that hiragana and katakana are not enough if a kanji are abolished as a system to keep Japanese functioning. That's pretty much like you can say that
Yeah. I
with
don't know enough
certainty.
about Korean
Like,
to really say anything, but yeah, if Japanese was
yeah,
just hiragana and katakana, it would um, be
it
much
would
less
crumble.
convenient to read. It would be way less efficient. It would take way longer to decipher text. But
Yeah.
anyway, cool. So thanks for watching this Q&A. To give a quick update on what I've been working on recently, I've been spending a lot of time creating the outline for the website. I'm creating like the skeleton bone structure of pretty much all the articles that I want to exist and how they're going to be organized. And along with that, making the new timelines and how it's going to correspond to everything. And so I'm not quite done with that, but I'd say I'm probably three-fourths through the entire process. And I think this was really the hardest part of the entire process because once I have this kind of big picture, big picture perspective of what all of what MI is going to be, then I'm going to have I'm going to be able to understand where each article is going to fit in that big picture, and therefore, know how much information I should put in, what I could leave out, and I mean the real hard part is thinking about what is everything I need people to know, and how should I distribute that information, and that's really what I'm doing now. After that, it just comes down to actually putting that information down on paper, and I think that's going to go relatively quickly. So yeah, look forward to new timelines coming out soon, and then more actual solid website content of how to learn languages coming up soon. So yeah, thanks for sticking with me. Just like last week, put all of your questions, comment all your questions on this Patreon post, and like all the questions that you want answered because I'm going to be answering all the questions that have the most like little heart button things next to them. So yeah, thanks for supporting me, guys. I really appreciate it. If it wasn't for you guys, I would not be able to create MIA. And good luck with your studies. And thanks for joining me, Nick.
Yep. Bye bye.
Peace out, guys.